If I were your change management lead on your digital transformation, I might do things a little bit differently than how you might manage change. But what exactly are those things, and how would I lead your change management efforts? Those are the questions I want to answer here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And one of the key ways that organizations reach their third stage of success is through an effective organizational change strategy and plan. Now, I've posted a lot of different videos about change management best practices and tips and pitfalls and things of that nature on this YouTube channel, but I've never stopped to just talk about what would I do if I were your change management leader, and that's what I want to talk about here today. The first thing I would do if I were your change management lead on your digital transformation is to really rethink the way I think about change management. In other words, I wouldn't view change management necessarily as a separate work stream or a parallel work stream. I would take more of a Trojan horse approach to change management. And what I mean by that is change management has a bad rap for having its own isolated activities that don't necessarily integrate with the core project or the core transformation. The other problem with change management oftentimes is that you have a separate change team trying to enable change and trying to connect the dots between what's intended with the digital transformation and what actually is realized by the organization. When in fact, it should be the leadership and the key stakeholders within the organization that are driving that change. So there's a fine line between bringing in change management expertise, whether that's internal or external expertise, and really ensuring that you internally own the face of change among the key stakeholders and executives on your team. So in other words, it may be that my role would be to help define what some of the communications and some of the messaging and tactics and strategies might be, but ultimately it would be you, the organization, the leaders within the organization that would actually communicate the changes or enable those changes to the organization. So that's the first thing I would do, is almost work myself out of a job in some ways and eliminate the role of change management leader and really focus on being a coach and advisor to help key stakeholders and leaders drive the changes that need to be enabled as part of the digital transformation. Now, once I've really rethought how we view change management and really focused on identifying who those key stakeholders and executives and faces of change would be, as I mentioned in the last point, the next thing I would do is make sure that we have a clear transformation strategy. And actually, this point has nothing to do with change management, or at least it's not a traditional way of thinking about change management. This is something that's even more fundamental than a solid change strategy. The reason being is that if you don't have a clear strategy and you're not aligned on a clear transformation strategy for your organization, then the best change management efforts, no matter how well I or anyone else might do with their change management initiatives, are not going to succeed. Change management is going to be difficult, if not impossible, without having that clarity of vision and purpose and the overall aligned transformation strategy that an organization needs to have. Now, most organizations think that they have a clear transformation strategy because they're trying to replace technology, they're trying to invest in new technology, introduce new capabilities. Perhaps their old legacy system is being sunset and they need to replace that system. Those are all decent reasons and they're good reasons for a transformation, but there's a lot more to it that you need to unpack. There's a lot of details and clarity that you need to define for the organization and for your team. And spoiler alert, most of the time this doesn't have a whole lot to do with the technology. More often than not, these fundamental questions we need to answer in getting that strategic alignment is focused more on things like, how much do we want to change? What types of business goals and objectives are we trying to enable with this transformation? How much risk are we willing to take on? How standardized do you want your business processes to be across the organization? Those are just a few examples of questions that need to be answered and you need to make sure you have alignment on before you can really be successful in a change management initiative or just in the transformation in general. So getting that strategic alignment and that clarity of vision for the overall transformation is one of the first most fundamental things I would do as part of the change management efforts that you might be engaging in. Once we had clarity on the overall transformation strategy, we're all aligned, we're all on the same page with what some of those key decisions and parameters for the transformation are, the next thing I would do is an organizational readiness assessment. This is where I would do a quantitative and qualitative assessment of different components of culture, leadership, communication style, operational nuances, things that will help understand where the organization is today and ultimately help us identify where the gaps are between where they are today and where we're going in the future. The other thing that this organizational assessment will do is help identify where those pockets of resistance might be. Change management oftentimes is viewed as sort of a shotgun approach. We just try a bunch of different tactics, we see what sticks, we've got our tools, our predefined methodologies, and we just try it all. But in reality, change management needs to be a lot more surgical than that, a lot more focused. And what I mean by that is we need to understand who's going to be impacted by change. We need to understand how big the changes are, who's most likely to resist the change, and we need to anticipate where that resistance to change is going to come from. A lot of organizations incorrectly assume that change management and resistance is something that is not going to be a problem for their organizations. On the surface, oftentimes that's true. On the surface, most employees in most organizations we work with are on board with change, they're supportive of the change, and they want to help the organization through the change. But inevitably, there are things that cause unintentional resistance along the way. Things like poor communication or lack of understanding or distrust of the leadership team or lack of clarity around the direction we're going with the transformation. Or another example might be the threat or the big impacts that this transformation might have to me personally. That might cause me to resist the change, even though on the surface I'm on board. Now I'm starting to feel threatened at a human and personal level, so therefore I'm going to start to resist the change. These are just a few examples of the sources of resistance that we need to start to anticipate and get ahead of, so they're not waiting until the symptoms creep up to the surface and become a problem, but instead we use this organizational assessment to identify and predict where those sources of resistance are so that we can create a change management strategy and plan that's very focused on hitting these prioritized areas of resistance in these prioritized pitfalls that we're likely to experience from a change management perspective. So this organizational assessment is a key foundational piece and a key input into defining a change strategy and plan that's aligned with your needs and your priorities. Now, once we have a clear understanding of where we are today, we've started to anticipate what some of the change risks are, the likely sources and pockets of resistance. Now we start to think about what are those future state organizational components that are going to be important to our transformation. This is the next thing I would do if I were your change manager. Now, this is a really important step because as your technical team and the functional team is going through the blueprint and design and deployment of technology, inevitably that has impacts on what the organization is going to look like in the future. People's jobs are going to change. Roles and responsibilities are going to change. Business processes are going to change, or at least they should. And we need to define what those future state business processes are. We need to define what the change impact is to the organization and different people within the organization. How are they impacted differently? What's the magnitude of change? All these sorts of things are really important to have clarity on so that we know exactly where we're going from an organizational perspective. And again, simply rolling out technology isn't enough. We need a change management strategy and plan that enables and helps us implement these technological and business process changes that are inevitably coming from the transformation project. So that future state organizational design and definition is the next thing I would do if I were your change management lead. Now that we have strategic alignment as an organization, we've done an organizational readiness assessment, we've defined that future organizational state, now we need to get into execution mode, more of the tactics of how we ensure that employees adopt the new processes and the new technologies. And too often, organizations myopically focus on just training the trainers to teach people how to use technology. And oftentimes this ends up feeling like you're really cramming technology down people's throats because you haven't taken the time to really focus on adoption, really focus on how business processes are going to change and how their role is going to change, how they're going to perform their job outside the system. There's a lot of different processes and things that are impacted even outside the direct usage of the system. So we need to focus on how to ensure that employees adapt to these new processes and technologies. Now, at third stage, one of the things that we use is a digital adoption tool that's designed for any sort of system that's being deployed as part of a digital transformation. And it's a way to provide on-demand and real-time coaching and guidance for how to perform certain processes and transactions in any sort of technology. It also helps identify and helps walk people through the process of performing their day-to-day jobs, whether it's in the technology or outside the technology or some combination of both. And this is just one example of an employee adoption tool that can be very effective in a digital transformation. So when you're defining your change strategy and plan, that's one of the next things I would do, is really focusing on defining that change strategy and plan that really focuses on employee adoption of new processes and technologies. The last major thing I would do if I were your change management lead is to integrate the overall change plan with the overall project plan. So in other words, if you have a PMO or a program manager that's managing the overall project, whether that's your own internal PMO or some sort of outside third party doing the project management, I would ensure that the change management strategies and tactics and the plan that results from all the things we've talked about so far in this discussion are incorporated into the overall project plan. Now, it's not just a matter of plugging and playing a change management plan as a separate work stream within the overall project plan. Oftentimes, the change management plan is going to directly impact the rest of the plan, or at least it should. For example, it may be, which is oftentimes the case for a lot of clients we work with, it may be that this organizational change work stream is actually the critical path. It's the task that's going to take the longest, or the work stream that's going to take longest in the transformation, and it's not going to move as fast as, say, your technical work stream. Usually, designing, building, and deploying technology is a lot easier and faster than navigating the human side of change. So oftentimes there's a reconciliation process that needs to happen, and that would be the next step I would perform, which is to not only integrate, but also reconcile the change management strategy and plan with the overall system integrator or technical implementer's strategy and plan as well. I would also make sure that there's an open dialogue around findings from the initial organizational assessment and ensuring that we've thought through what the risks are from an implementation perspective. For example, if we find that there's going to be more resistance in this project than we might have thought going into it, it may be that we have the wrong timeline. It may be that we have the wrong resource plan or the wrong budget, or that we need to revisit that to reflect the realities of who we are today versus who we're trying to become in the future. So there's a whole host of reconciliation that needs to happen with the overall organizational change plan as it integrates with the overall project management plan. So these are just a few of the things I would do if I were your change management leader. I've also included links below to a paper that I wrote that's focused on providing a guide to organizational change management. And this guide to organizational change management contains a number of best practices and tips and lessons learned from past change management efforts that we've been involved with here at Third Stage. So I encourage you to download that white paper using the links below. I've also included links to other resources that I think will help you in your digital transformation and your change management journey. So I encourage you to check out some of those resources that I've included in the description field below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day. And the spoiler alert here is that traditionally, forgot what I was going to say.
It's okay.
Now my story, gosh, yes, yeah, it was a great spoiler alert. I just can't remember what it was. I'm sure there's more. I just can't think of. Surely there's more.